What happens when Clint Eastwood, the iron-willed icon of Dirty Harry, faces off with Robert Redford, the charismatic star of The Sting, in a battle for the soul of Hollywood? This was the moment when dignity triumphed over cynicism, broadcast live to millions. Clint Eastwood, a man whose films spoke to the heart of America, from the dusty trails of Unforgiven to the raw emotion of Million Dollar Baby. Yet, for all his Oscars, the elite often dismissed him as just a blockbuster star. Robert Redford, a golden boy of the silver screen whose Sundance Film Festival redefined indie cinema, but whose charm carried a hint of superiority. What began as a conversation between two legends spiraled into a war of words that shook the foundations of their legacies. A modern talk show stage became their battlefield, and America watched, breathless. Stay to the end to witness this clash of titans. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Redford cross a line? Let's dive into the drama that changed Hollywood forever. The studio of Spotlight, a sleek modern talk show set in Los Angeles, glowed under neon lights, its glossy black table reflecting the soft hum of anticipation. Yet, the atmosphere carried a nostalgic warmth, reminiscent of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. The set's deep burgundy curtains and plush armchairs evoked the 1980s, a time when late-night TV was a ritual for families across America. Massive LED screens behind the stage flashed iconic movie posters: Dirty Harry, The Sting, Gran Torino, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid, stoking the crowd's excitement. The audience, a sea of silver hair and weathered smiles, clutched signs reading "Clint Forever" and "Sundance King." These were viewers who'd grown up on Eastwood's squinting glare and Redford's effortless charm, who'd watched Unforgiven in theaters and debated all the president's men over coffee. Tonight, they'd come to see two legends reflect on their careers, but the air crackled with something more volatile. Backstage, the tension was palpable. Producers huddled in the green room, whispering about a decades-old rift between Eastwood and Redford. "They've avoided each other since the 80s, one said, adjusting her headset. "Something about a shelved project, a Western they were supposed to do together." Another producer shook his head. "Clint's publicist begged us to steer clear of Hollywood rivalries. Redford's team? They just smiled and said, 'Let Bob be Bob.'" The host, James Harper, a polished 50-something with a voice like warm whiskey, paced near the stage. Harper was known for his ability to coax raw emotion from guests without stealing the spotlight. His questions were sharp but fair, designed to spark conversation, not chaos. Tonight, though, even he sensed the brewing storm. "This is either going to be legendary or a disaster," he muttered to his assistant, straightening his tie. As the spotlight theme music swelled, a jazzy, nostalgic tune with a modern electronic twist, the audience roared. Harper strode onto the stage, his smile wide, but his eyes cautious. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Two giants of cinema, two men who shaped the movies we love. Please welcome Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford." The crowd erupted as the two legends entered from opposite sides of the stage. Eastwood, at 94, moved with deliberate grace, his lean frame clad in a tailored charcoal suit. His face, etched with lines like a desert canyon, carried the weight of a lifetime in Hollywood. His pale blue eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room, acknowledging the "Clint Forever" signs with a faint nod. The audience felt it. A quiet strength, the same grit they'd seen in the good, the bad, and the ugly. Redford, 88, glided in with the effortless poise of a man who'd never lost his leading man glow. His silver blonde hair caught the studio lights, and his navy blazer over a crisp white shirt screamed refined taste. His smile, warm yet enigmatic, hinted at the charisma that had lit up. Out of Africa and the natural. But as he glanced at Eastwood, his eyes flickered with something colder. A challenge, perhaps, or a memory. The two men shook hands, their grip firm but brief, like duelists before a showdown. They settled into their armchairs, Eastwood's posture upright, Redford's relaxed but alert. Harper leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Gentlemen," he said, "it's an honor. Let's start with your legacies. Clint, Unforgiven redefined the Western. How did you approach that masterpiece? Eastwood's voice, gravelly yet measured, filled the studio. Unforgiven was about truth, he said. About men facing their past, their sins. I made it for the people, not the critics, not the festivals. For the folks who work hard and want stories that hit deep. The audience cheered, their applause warm and heartfelt. A woman in the front row, holding a $1 million baby poster, dabbed her eyes. Harper turned to Redford. And you, Robert. Sundance changed the game for independent film. What drove you to create that platform? Redford leaned back, his fingers steepled. Cinema was getting lazy, he said, his tone smooth but pointed. Big studios churned out noise, explosions, car chases. Sundance was about art, about voices that Hollywood ignored. His gaze slid toward Eastwood, lingering just long enough to draw a murmur from the crowd. We wanted films that mattered, not just ones that filled seats. Eastwood's jaw tightened, a subtle shift that only the cameras caught. Funny, he said, his voice low but cutting. I always thought movies mattered when they spoke to the heart, not just the head. My films were for America, not a lecture hall. The audience stirred, sensing the first spark of conflict. Harper, ever the diplomat, smiled. Two different visions, both iconic, he said. Let's dig deeper. Clint, how do you feel about the state of Hollywood today? Eastwood leaned forward, his eyes narrowing like Harry Callahan sizing up a target. Hollywood's lost its nerve, he said. Too many remakes, too many suits chasing trends. Back in the 70s, we took risks. Dirty Harry wasn't safe, but it was real. People connected with it because it didn't preach. Redford chuckled, a soft, almost condescending sound. Risks, Clint? Your films were hits because they gave people what they wanted. Guns, grit, simple stories. But art challenges. It doesn't just comfort. He paused, his smile sharpening. Sundance took risks your blockbusters never could. The studio fell silent, the air thick as Los Angeles smog. Harper's eyebrows rose, but his voice stayed neutral. Clint, what do you say to that? Eastwood's fingers tapped the armrest, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I say, Robert, you're preaching now. My films told stories for the working man, the folks who don't fly private to your festivals. They didn't need subtitles to feel something. The crowd roared, their loyalty to Eastwood palpable. A man in the back, wearing a faded Gran Torino t-shirt, shouted, Tell him, Clint. Redford's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a steely edge. Working man? Come on, Clint. Your films made millions. You weren't exactly starving for art's sake. You fed the machine, blockbusters that drowned out the real storytellers. Eastwood's gaze locked onto Redford's, a stare that could have burned through steel. And you, Bob? You traded acting for a soapbox. Sundance isn't about storytellers, it's about your ego, your need to play gatekeeper for what's worthy. The audience gasped, the tension now a living thing. Harper, sensing the moment, leaned in. Robert, your reaction? Redford's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. My ego? Clint, you've been playing the same tough guy for 50 years. Your legacy is a brand, not a vision. You cashed in on America's wallet, not its soul. The words landed like a slap. Eastwood's face didn't flinch, but his eyes blazed, the same fire that had lit up the outlaw Josie Wales. The crowd, torn between their love for both men, fell into a stunned hush. A woman clutching a Butch Cassidy sign whispered to her husband, He didn't just say that. Harper, his voice calm but probing, said, Clint, how do you respond? Eastwood leaned back, his silence heavier than words. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a growl. You talk about soul, Robert? I've spent 70 years telling stories for people who don't get invited to your galas. $1 Million Baby wasn't a brand. It was a story about heart, about sacrifice. You wouldn't know because you stopped acting to play professor. The crowd erupted, their applause shaking the studio. Redford's smile faltered, just for a moment, before he recovered. Heart? he said, his tone now openly cynical. Your films are popcorn, Clint. Loud, predictable, forgettable. The 70s, when I worked with Paul Newman, when we made The Sting, that was cinema. You? You just made. Noise. Eastwood's fingers stilled on the armrest. His eyes, those pale blue daggers, fixed on Redford with an intensity that silenced the room. The audience, who'd cheered for Unforgiven and wept for The Bridges of Madison County, felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. Harper, sensing the brink, said softly, Gentlemen, let's... But Redford cut him off, his voice rising. No, James, let's be honest. Clint calls it legacy, but it's commerce. His films buried the art we fought for in the 70s. He's no artist, he's a product. The studio froze. Eastwood's face was stone, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. The audience, loyal to the man who'd given them Dirty Harry and Gran Torino, held their breath. What would Clint do? The studio of Spotlight was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the weight of Robert Redford's words. He's no artist, he's a product. The accusation hung like gunpowder smoke, daring Clint Eastwood to respond. The audience, a sea of faces who'd grown up on Dirty Harry and Unforgiven, sat frozen, their signs, Clint Forever and Sundance King, forgotten in their laps. James Harper, the host, leaned forward, his neutral facade cracking under the intensity. Clint, he said softly, his voice a lifeline in the silence. How do you respond? Eastwood, at 94, sat motionless, his lean frame a silhouette of weathered steel in his charcoal suit. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers still, but his pale blue eyes burned with the same fire that had stared down outlaws in the good, the bad, and the ugly. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every line on his face, lines earned through 7 decades of telling America's stories. The audience felt it. This wasn't just Clint Eastwood, the star. This was Clint Eastwood, the man, defending a lifetime's work against a peer who dared to diminish it. Redford, across the table, leaned back in his chair, his silver blonde hair catching the neon glow of the studio lights. His smile, once warm and charismatic, now carried a cynical edge, the kind that had lit up all the president's men but now felt weaponized. He folded his arms, confident he'd landed the final blow. The crowd murmured, some nodding in reluctant agreement with Redford's critique, others glaring, loyal to the man who'd given them Gran Torino. Eastwood's silence stretched, each second amplifying the tension. A woman in the front row, clutching a $1 million baby poster, whispered to her neighbor, "He's not going to let that slide." The man next to her, wearing a faded outlaw Josie Wales cap, nodded. "Clint, don't back down." Finally, Eastwood leaned forward, his movements slow, deliberate, like a gunslinger drawing his weapon. His voice, gravelly yet resonant, filled the studio with a power that silenced every rustle, every cough. "Robert," he began, his eyes locked on Redford's. "You talk about art like it's something you gatekeep in your Sundance cabins. But art ain't about lectures or festivals. It's about people. It's about stories that stay with them when the credits roll." The audience stirred, their applause tentative but growing. Redford's smile twitched, but he didn't interrupt. Eastwood's gaze never left him, his voice steady but laced with steel. "I've spent my life telling stories for folks who don't get invited to your galas. Dirty Harry spoke to cops on the streets, to people scared in their homes. Unforgiven wasn't preach. It showed what a man carries when he's done wrong. $1 Million Baby wasn't need your approval to break hearts." The crowd roared, their applause shaking the studio. A man in the back, holding a Clint Forever sign, stood, his eyes wet. Redford shifted in his fingers, drumming lightly on the armrests, but his face remained a mask of cool detachment. Harper, sensing the tide turning, said, "Robert, what's your thoughts on—" Eastwood raised a hand, cutting him off. His eyes, those pale blue daggers, still pinned Redford. "You call my films commerce? I call them truth. I made them for America. The working man, the families, the ones who don't need a film degree to feel something. You?" He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word a bullet. You traded your stories for a soapbox. Sundance isn't about filmmakers, it's about you, Bob. Your need to play professor to tell the world what's worthy. But the people in this room, he gestured to the audience, they don't need your permission to love my movies. The studio exploded, the audience leaping to their feet, their cheers a thunderous wave. Signs waved wildly, Clint forever, and Dirty Harry, as the crowd, who'd grown up on Eastwood's grit and grace, poured out their loyalty. A woman in the third row, her face streaked with tears, shouted, "You tell him, Clint!" The cameras caught it all. The raw emotion, the standing ovation, the unyielding resolve in Eastwood's eyes. Redford's composure cracked, his smile gone, replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. He leaned forward, his voice sharp now, but quieter, almost offensive. "You're good at this, Clint. Always were. You play the everyman, the hero. But your films? They're loud, simplistic. The 70s, when I worked with Paul Newman when we made The Sting, that was cinema. Art that challenged, that lasted. You just gave him popcorn." Eastwood's eyes narrowed, a glint of something dangerous flickering within them, like Harry Callahan before a final shot. He stood slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the glossy table. The audience hushed, sensing the moment. He reached for his microphone, his fingers steady, and unclipped it from his jacket. The faint clink echoed through the studio, a sound as potent as a hammer striking steel. "Robert," he said, his voice low, controlled but devastating, "you forgot what stories are for. They're not for your ego. They're for the people who carry 'em home. I made my movies for them, not you, not the critics. My legacy?" He paused, glancing at the audience, his eyes softening for a fleeting second. "It speaks for itself." With that, Eastwood placed the microphone on the table, the deliberate clink that reverberated like a gunshot. He turned, his back straight, and walked off the stage, his steps measured but unyielding. The audience rose again, their applause deafening, a tidal wave of admiration for the man who'd just defended a lifetime's work with quiet, unshakable dignity. Harper, caught off guard, stammered, "Clint, wait!" But Eastwood didn't look back. The cameras followed him as he passed the burgundy curtains, his silhouette fading into the shadows of the wings. Redford sat motionless, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the empty chair across from him. For the first time, the charismatic star of Butch Cassidy looked small, his confidence shattered. Harper turned to Redford, his voice hesitant. "Robert, your reaction?" Redford opened his mouth, then closed it. His fingers twitched, as if reaching for a retort, but none came. The audience, still standing, watched in silence, their loyalty clear. A man in the back muttered, "He had that coming." The woman next to him nodded, clutching her The Natural poster but applauding for Eastwood. The studio was a paradox, deafening applause and an oppressive silence all at once. Harper, ever the professional, forced a smile. "Well, folks, that was legendary, wasn't it?" He glanced at Redford, who offered a weak nod, his eyes distant. The spotlight theme music swelled, but it felt hollow, unable to mask the seismic shift that had just occurred. Backstage, Eastwood moved through the chaos with the same quiet resolve he'd shown on stage. Producers swarmed, their headsets buzzing with panicked chatter. "Clint, are you okay?" one asked, her eyes wide. Eastwood paused, his face unreadable. "I said what I needed to," he replied, his voice steady. He glanced at a monitor showing the studio, where Redford still sat, his head bowed slightly. For a moment, Eastwood's eyes softened, not with pity, but with the weariness of a man who'd fought too many battles. Then he walked on, disappearing into the night outside the studio, where a single street lamp cast a glow like a scene from Pale Rider. In the studio, Harper wrapped the show, his voice strained but professional. "Thank you, Robert Redford, for joining us, and to Clint Eastwood, wherever you are, thank you for your legacy." The audience applauded, but their eyes lingered on the empty chair, a symbol of Eastwood's triumph. Redford rose, offering a practiced smile to the crowd, but his steps toward the wings were heavy, lacking the swagger he'd entered with. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. By morning, headlines screamed across America. Eastwood crushes Redford in epic showdown. And Clint defends Hollywood's soul on Spotlight. Cable news replayed the clip of Eastwood's exit, pundits dissecting every word. On Good Morning America, a film critic said, Clint reminded us why his films endure. They speak to the heart, not the ego. Social media, though not the domain of the 55-plus crowd, lit up with memes of Eastwood's squinting glare captioned, "Go ahead, make my day." Fans flooded X with tributes, sharing grainy clips of Dirty Harry and the bridges of Madison County. A post from a 62-year-old in Ohio read, "Clint's been my hero since I was a kid." Redford crossed a line. Nobody disrespects a legend like that. Another, from a 70-year-old in Texas, wrote, "Unforgiven got me through tough times." Clint's right. His movies are for us, not the elites. The sentiment echoed in diners, church halls, and living rooms across the country, where the 55-plus generation rallied behind the man who'd given them stories of grit and grace. Redford, for his part, retreated to silence. His team issued a brief statement. Robert respects Clint's contributions and regrets any misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Sundance, once a beacon of indie purity, faced whispers of elitism, its founder's words weaponized against him. A Variety op-ed noted, Redford's critique wasn't wrong, but his delivery was cruel. Eastwood's dignity won the night. For Eastwood, the moment was bittersweet. At 94, he'd long grown weary of Hollywood's sniping. Friends said he returned to his Carmel home, spending days walking the beach, reflecting on a career that had outlasted trends and critics. A Los Angeles Times profile quoted his longtime producer, Clint didn't want to fight, but he'll never let his work, or his audience, be disrespected. That night was vintage Eastwood. The Spotlight Showdown became legend, a story told and retold by fans who'd watched Gran Torino with their kids or wept during Million Dollar Baby. It reminded them of a Hollywood they loved, one of raw stories, not polished agendas. For the 55-plus audience, it was more than a clash of egos. It was a vindication of their values: hard work, heart, and the dignity of a life well lived. The moral was clear, etched in the silence of Eastwood's exit. Dignity and respect for legacy triumph over envy and cynicism. His films, from The Outlaw Josie Wales to American Sniper, weren't just movies, they were mirrors of America's soul, reflecting its struggles and dreams. Redford's Sundance had its place, but Eastwood's stories belonged to the people, and no critic could take that away. As the dust settled, Spotlight saw record ratings, its YouTube clip racking up millions of views. Comments poured in, many from the 55-plus crowd. Clint's a hero. Redford should be ashamed. Unforgiven is art. Period. Thank you, Clint, for standing up for us. The video ended with a simple call to action, flashing across the screen. Was Eastwood right to defend his legacy? Did Redford go too far? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more Hollywood stories. In living rooms across America, viewers nodded, their hearts full. They'd grown up with Clint's squint, Redford's smile, and a Hollywood that felt like family. That night on Spotlight, they'd seen a legend remind the world why true stories and true dignity never fade.